Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. As many of you know, I'm a huge MMA fan as well as a pretty big wrestling fan. Have been since I was a kid. So it's something that I've been following for quite some time. I've been following MMA for, 20 years, over 20 years at this point, and it's something that I've always enjoyed very much. And Ronda Rousey's career is something that I've seen since her Strikeforce days before it was bought out by the UFC. Never really cared for her, to be honest. Never was a big fan of hers, but gotta give credit where it's due, right? And what she was able to accomplish in the UFC, helping to bring women's MMA truly into the mainstream in the UFC, and bearing that flag for the UFC and the women's bantamweight division, being an all-time great in that division at a time where women's MMA hadn't really turned that corner just yet. She was very dominant when she was at the top, and when she inevitably fell, she didn't handle it with the most grace, which was unfortunate. And not surprising. She had talked about being a big fan of MMA prior to her leaving the UFC. She had already made some appearances with the WWE at one of the WrestleManias and getting involved and stuff like that. So when she decided to transition over into WWE after her UFC career was over, her MMA career was over, that wasn't too big of a surprise. It seemed like the next logical step for her, since she had already built up those relationships. But she was on Steve-O's podcast the other day called Wild Ride. I'll link that video in the description below, as well as this article, where she said some things that now have gotten under the skin of some wrestling fans. Let's go over the article here real quick, and then I'll give some thoughts. So this is from Pro Wrestling Sheet, and it says, Ronda Rousey says she won't return to WWE full-time, blames ungrateful fans. Okay. If Ronda Rousey ever returns to WWE, the former Raw Women's Champion says it won't be in a full-time capacity, and she says ungrateful wrestling fans are to blame. On the latest episode of the Wild Ride with Steve-O podcast, Rousey talked about working for WWE and the type of schedule she had on the road. I love the WWE. I had such a great time. I love all the girls in the locker room, Ronda said. Running out there and having fake fights for fun is just the best thing. I love choreography, I love acting, I love theater, live theater, and some of the last forms of live theater. But I was doing basically part-time, and I was away from home 200 days out of the year. And when I did get home, I was so sleep deprived because you don't have time to lay down. Rousey goes on to say she learned she had a broken vertebrae in her lower back prior to signing with the WWE during her medical exams. So when she was home, she'd have to be laying down with a heat pad on her back and a Tempur-Pedic pillow under her neck the whole time. If I did all the live shows, I was only home a day and a half a week. And it was just not worth it for my family because we were eliminating all our expenses and living this lifestyle. We didn't need it. We didn't need the money, Ronda continued. So it's just like, what am I doing this for if I'm not being able to spend my time and energy on my family, but instead spending my time and my energy on a bunch of effing ungrateful fans that don't even appreciate me? I love performing, I love the girls, I love being out there. But at the end of the day, I was just like, F these fans, dude. My family loves me and they appreciate me, and I want all my energy to go into them. So that was my decision at the end of the day. And it's like, hey girls, love what you're doing. I'm going to try to take all the momentum and push you guys as far as I can. Fly, little bird, fly. I'm going effing home. And that was basically it. Rousey ends this portion of the conversation saying that if she ever does return to the WWE, it will not be in a full-time capacity, only short chunks of time. And then they link the interview that Steve-O did with her on his podcast below, and it's about 45 minutes in where she talks about this specifically that they cover here in this article. And it's one of those things that I can understand where she's coming from, but clearly it shows, at least to me, that Ronda hasn't changed in the sense of being thin-skinned. If y'all remember when she was KO'd by Holly Holm, for those of you that follow MMA, and then then after that her comeback fight was again KO'd, second time around by Amanda Nunes. Didn't talk to the media, didn't talk after her first loss, and apparently burned some bridges with some people. After she was KO'd by Holly Holm, there was accounts of her kind of lashing out at other UFC fighters just for congratulating Holly Holm on beating her, you know what I mean? And not even necessarily specifically saying anything like, hey, congrats on beating up Ronda. It was more like, you know, congrats for winning the title and things like that. And it was all really silly and childish things. Now, I don't know how true those accounts are. Of course, one of those accounts comes from Paige Van Zandt, saying that she was confronted by Ronda after just congratulating Holly on her victory, which is ridiculous if you think about it. It's just like, it's a sport, especially in MMA. There's a very, you know, there's a very likely chance that you will eventually lose by either submission, KO, or maybe some other unforeseen circumstance. It's the nature of the sport. No, it's very rare for anybody to really stay undefeated in the sport of MMA. I mean, that's something that you see more in boxing because it's easier to kind of pad your record and really dictate where your career is going to go in boxing. In MMA, not so much. There's a lot more of really having to fight who's next in line, although sometimes there's some politicking in there too, but it's not nearly as bad as it is in boxing, where you could really kind of pad your record and you have a lot more control over who you face and when. So I mean, Floyd Mayweather, but that's, again, this is not surprising to me that she would say something like this, and it kind of, I think it's indicative of how committed she really was, and you know, how passionate she was, which wasn't, in my opinion, as much as it should have been. I mean, I'm sure she enjoyed wrestling as a fan, but this is the nature of wrestling as well. Fans can be fickle sometimes. Are there ungrateful fans out there? I'm sure that they do exist, but for the most part, I would think not. Because, I mean, think about this for a moment. The reason why these fans are paying, they're paying to either see you win or they're paying to see you lose, but I don't think, you know, there might be some fans out there that are unappreciative and ungrateful, but I think for the most part, longtime wrestling fans know that people put their bodies on the line to entertain them, and I think for the most part, I'd like to think, at least for the most part, that they can appreciate that and respect that. The fact that they don't cheer for you because they want to cheer for somebody else instead is not something that you should really take personally. Fans always dictate who's going to be a top star. I think with Ronda, it was just a matter of timing. I mean, Becky Lynch was on fire. She was hot at that point in time, and they wanted to rally around her. They wanted to rally around somebody who was really turning the corner in their career, and that was, you know, was a wrestler that had paid their dues. You know, Ronda, you know, don't get me wrong, what she accomplished in the sport that she was in prior in MMA, she put in a lot of hard work. She's a true athlete. I mean, she's an Olympian. None of that, I think, is discredited or dismissed, but at the same time, that's just kind of how wrestling fans are. There's still that little bit of old school in some wrestling fans where, you know, they might cheer for somebody new that comes in, but they really like to see the person that's really given a good portion of their life to this, that's really put in the time and worked their way up to that status, right? To get to that they've been in the business for, you know, maybe more than a decade or years. You know, they were on the indie scene and really worked their way up to get to the WWE. And a lot of times when fans see that, they reward that. They reward that with their cheers. They reward it, again, you know, with their money by spending money on their merchandise to show support of them. So, I mean, that's not something that I think is showing that they're being ungrateful. I think they're being very grateful. I mean, otherwise, why even bother, you know, buying merch and things like that if they weren't showing a degree of gratitude, right? So I think that it's a matter of just Ronda really having thin skin and just having this perception, which again, I'm sure again that there are fans that are that way, that might not be grateful towards her efforts. But look, you know, I understand where she's coming from. Hey, I was hurt getting into this and people still don't appreciate it afterwards. Look, we know that this is an industry where people get hurt pretty often, and there's no off season for wrestlers. They have to continue to work even when they're injured. It's the nature of what they do. and you know that getting into it. And if Ronda has been a long-time wrestling fan, there's no way she couldn't have known that before getting into this. She has to expect that, look, I get it, you know, you're hurt going into this and you feel people are being ungrateful, but again, you know what you're signing up for when you get into the wrestling business, that this is a very big possibility. This is an industry where careers have ended due to accidents. You know what you're putting on the line. You're putting a lot more of your body on the line than you are in, I would even say, other sports, even in MMA to a degree, because MMA you can get seriously hurt, but at the same time, fights can end without anybody getting injured. Fights can end because somebody puts on a submission on somebody really quick, and that's it, and that's the fight. Or somebody gets knocked out real quick, and of course that could cause brain damage depending on how hard they're hit. But repeated damage is much more that's much more harmful to a person's well-being over time. So look at Chris Benoit, how many concussions he suffered over the course of his career that could have potentially led to what he did, right? So Ronda, I mean, I don't know what else to say here. I mean, I'm not too surprised, like I said, considering how she handled her losses in the UFC and her overall attitude. I think that she feels entitled to something to a certain degree. I can understand some of where she's coming from, but she knew what she was signing up for. So I'd like to know what you all think, though, in the comment section below. Do you think that Ronda has a point here? Because, like I said, I can agree with some of what she's saying. I could understand a little where she's coming from, but ultimately, I think this is just another instance of her just being thin-skinned and letting the fans get to her when they really shouldn't. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time, y'all know how it goes. Hunt continues. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a like, share, and comment below.